My name is Catherine Sterling, though for the last 23 years, most of the world has known me as Mrs. Arthur Davenport. I grew up in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in a house filled with the scent of old books and my father's pipe tobacco. My family, the Sterlings, were lawyers and judges people who believed in the quiet authority of well-argued cases and the unshakable foundation of precedent. I was raised on logic, on the careful construction of arguments, and on the belief that a life like a legal brief should be built on a foundation of unassailable facts. I met Arthur when I was working as a clerk at my father's firm. He was a brilliant, hungry young associate with a vision that seemed to burn behind his eyes. He didn't come from money or influence. He had only his relentless ambition and a charm that could disarm the most hardened skeptic. I was drawn to the fire in him, a stark contrast to the cool, measured world I'd always known. He saw in me not just a partner in life, but a partner in his dreams. My inheritance, a modest but significant sum from my grandmother, provided the seed capital for what would become Davenport Consolidated. My legal training helped draft the initial contracts, and my family's name opened doors that would have remained closed to him. We were a team. He was the dazzling frontman, the visionary who captivated investors, and I was the steady hand behind the scenes, ensuring the foundation we built was solid enough to bear the weight of his grand ambitions. For 2 decades, I found a quiet satisfaction in that role. I believed we were building a single shared legacy. Our life was beautiful, curated, a testament to our success. A sprawling stone house overlooking the ocean in Port Meridian, children grown and launched into their own successful lives, a calendar filled with the kinds of events that signaled we had truly arrived. I had poured my intellect, my inheritance, and my heart into the edifice of our life, never questioning my place within its walls. I saw my reflection in its polished surfaces and believed it was a true likeness. The security guard at the entrance to the St. Regis Grand smiled and waved me through his greeting, warm and familiar. "Good evening, Mrs. Davenport. He's been waiting for you." His deference felt as natural as breathing. For 23 years I had been the silent, essential half of Arthur Davenport. Tonight was the culmination of it, all the celebration of Davenport Consolidated's entry into the global top 100, a milestone that cemented Arthur's status as a titan of industry. Our status. I smoothed the silk of my deep sapphire gown, a color Arthur had once told me matched the twilight over the ocean from our bedroom window. The ballroom was a symphony of light and sound. Thousands of tiny crystals on the chandeliers refracted the warm glow onto the faces of Port Meridian's most powerful figures. I saw the mayor laughing with a banking CEO, his wife, Cynthia Powell, catching my eye and offering a perfectly manicured wave. "Catherine, you look stunning," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks. Her perfume was a familiar cloud of gardenia and expensive restraint. "Arthur must be on top of the world. What an incredible achievement. We're both very proud," I replied, my smile feeling genuine. I scanned the glittering crowd for Arthur's distinguished silver hair and commanding posture. "It's been a long road." Cynthia's own smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before it was restored to its full social wattage. "Of course, dear. You've always been his rock." The word "his" landed with a strange weight, but she had already turned to greet a city councilman, leaving me to dismiss the odd feeling. I moved through the room, a familiar vessel for the congratulations meant for my husband. I accepted them, graciously making small talk with people whose children had grown up with mine, whose vacation homes were down the coast from ours. But as I navigated the clusters of tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns, a subtle chill began to permeate the warm air. Conversations seemed to hush as I approached, restarting with a forced brightness on a different topic. I saw heads inclined toward each other, followed by quick, meaningful glances in my direction. The smiles I received began to feel different, less congratulatory, more repeating. Near the towering ice sculpture of the company logo, I overheard a snippet of conversation between 2 wives from our golf club. I just feel terrible for her. To be the only one who doesn't know they saw me, and immediately began admiring the floral arrangements with breathless enthusiasm. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I finally spotted Arthur by the main stage holding court with a group of international investors I knew he'd been courting for months. He looked magnificent, a king in his element, radiating the potent charisma that had first captivated me. This was his triumph, and my rightful place was by his side, sharing in the warmth of his spotlight. As I drew closer, however, the circle of men seemed to subtly contract their bodies, forming an almost imperceptible barrier. Arthur, deep in an animated story about a recent acquisition, gave no sign that he'd noticed my arrival just a few feet away. "Arthur," I said softly, my hand gently touching the sleeve of his tuxedo. He turned. For a single unguarded moment, his expression was not one of affection or even recognition, but of pure undiluted annoyance. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the polite, distant smile he reserved for junior employees or overeager vendors. "Catherine, you made it." His tone was flat, devoid of warmth. There was no kiss on the cheek, no arm slipped around my waist, no gesture to include me in the conversation with the German investors he'd been so anxious to impress. I tried to keep my voice light, to paper over the sudden gaping chasm that had opened between us. "Of course, I'm here. It's our night, isn't it?" One of the investors cleared his throat and mumbled an excuse about finding his wife. Another checked his watch with theatrical importance. Within seconds, the group had dissolved, leaving Arthur and me standing alone in a small pocket of silence. "I need to keep circulating," he said, his eyes already scanning the room, seeking his next audience. "These connections won't build themselves." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing by the stage like a piece of forgotten luggage. The sting of his dismissal was sharp, but the public nature of it was a deeper wound. I was acutely aware of the eyes on me, the whispers that now seemed to rise in volume. That's when I heard it, a voice cutting through the ambient murmur, with chilling clarity. "There she is, the Ice Queen. Can't blame him for looking elsewhere, can you?" The words spoken by a woman just behind me were designed to be heard. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, but I couldn't pinpoint the source in the sea of elegant, smiling faces. "Poor thing," another voice chimed in, dripping with false sympathy. "She has no clue about Chloe." Chloe. The name landed like a stone in my gut. Arthur's new executive assistant. A fiercely ambitious woman in her late 20s, with a razor-sharp mind and a wardrobe of form-fitting dresses. The one who stayed for late-night strategy sessions I was no longer invited to. The one who traveled with him on business trips he insisted I'd find boring. The one whose name flashed on his phone at all hours, accompanied by a quickening of his pulse that he dismissed as work stress. The scattered puzzle pieces I had subconsciously refused to assemble now clicked into a horrifyingly clear picture. The sudden interest in a new expensive gym. The unexplained receipts from restaurants I'd never heard of. The way he now showered the moment he came home, as if washing away a day I was no longer a part of. "Catherine, darling." The voice was sweet as poison. Chloe herself materialized at my side, a vision in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her smile was a masterpiece of predatory triumph. "Hello, Chloe." I managed my voice a thin thread. She leaned in, her cloying perfume invading my space. "I think there's been a small mix-up. This part of the evening is really for key stakeholders and essential personnel." The audacity of it stole my breath, but from some deep, forgotten well of self-preservation, I found my voice. "I'm a key stakeholder. I own 15% of this company." A look of mock pity crossed her face. "Owned," she corrected her voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Past tense. Arthur's been meaning to talk to you about some restructuring. He felt it was best to simplify the ownership portfolio." Before I could even process the meaning of her words, 2 security guardsmen, I recognized men, who had driven my car and carried my groceries, appeared at my elbows. Their faces were impassive, their eyes looking straight through me. "Security will see this woman out," Chloe announced, her voice rising to a pitch that carried across the stunned silence of the nearest guests. "She seems to be confused." The ballroom went quiet. 100 pairs of eyes turned to watch my public undoing. I looked desperately toward Arthur, pleading with my eyes for him to intervene to stop this nightmare. He was standing not 20 feet away. He met my gaze for a heartbeat, his face a mask of cold indifference, before he deliberately turned his back to me and became engrossed in a conversation about market projections. As the guards gently but inexorably guided me toward the grand exit, the life I had so carefully built shattered around me. The woman who had entered this ballroom as Mrs. Arthur Davenport was being escorted out like a trespasser, her value, her history, her very identity erased in a single brutal act of betrayal. The hotel's revolving door spun me out into the cool night air, each rotation a final definitive turn away from my old life. The grand marble staircase felt treacherous, each step a descent from the gilded cage I hadn't even realized I was in. The valet who had greeted me with such warmth an hour earlier now studiously avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by the scuff on his shoe. My heels clicked a frantic, unsteady rhythm on the pavement, a counterpoint to the city's vibrant pulse. Couples strolled hand in hand, their laughter echoing in the night. I felt like a ghost, observing a world of connection and joy from which I had been violently expelled. In my small clutch nestled beside my lipstick was the reason I had been so eager to find Arthur. I pulled out the small velvet-covered box. My thumb traced its soft edges. Inside lay a custom-made compass pendant in brushed white gold. Engraved on the back were the precise coordinates of Seacrest Bluffs, the wild windswept beach where he had proposed 23 years ago, promising we would always navigate the world together. I had commissioned it months ago, a symbol of our shared journey intended as a surprise for him after his speech. The irony was so bitter it made me want to gag. "Mom, are you all right?" A young woman in a catering uniform had stepped out for a cigarette, her expression one of genuine, uncomplicated concern. It was the first honest human emotion I'd encountered all evening. Just needed some air. I managed my attempt at a smile, feeling like a crack in a porcelain mask. She nodded, lighting her cigarette, but continuing to watch me with a worried frown. Did I look as broken as I felt? I pulled my shoulders back, a reflexive gesture of composure learned over decades of being on public display. I walked toward the parking garage, each step an act of will, building something new inside. May not grief, not yet, but something harder, more resilient. My car, a silver sedan Arthur, had chosen for its understated elegance, sat waiting under the harsh fluorescent lights. I slid into the driver's seat, but didn't turn the key. I sat in the humming silence of the concrete structure, the events of the last hour replaying in my mind. It wasn't just the affair. It was the calculated, systematic erasure of my existence. Every article about Davenport Consolidated lauded Arthur as the singular genius, the self-made man. There was no mention of the woman who had liquidated her inheritance to fund his first lease. No footnote for the family connections that had landed his first major client. No acknowledgement of the thousands of hours I'd spent refining his strategies, editing his proposals, and hosting the dinners that sealed his deals. He hadn't just taken a mistress. He had stolen my history. With a newfound clarity, I opened my phone. My finger hovered over Arthur's contact photo before scrolling down to Liam Chen, financial advisor. "Catherine, it's after 10. Is everything okay?" Liam's voice was sharp with concern. "Liam, I need you to execute a series of transactions for me first thing in the morning." "Of course, but what's the rush?" "We just balanced your portfolio. I want to liquidate my entire stake in Davenport Consolidated. All of it. The full 15%. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Catherine, that's a $22 million move. That's a foundational part of your portfolio. Perhaps we should meet on Monday to discuss the ramifications." "Monday morning, Liam. As soon as the market opens. I also need you to freeze every joint account, every credit card, every line of credit tied to Arthur. Shut it all down. Are you getting a divorce?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. An hour ago, the word would have been unthinkable. Now it felt like the only logical conclusion. "Just execute the trades, Liam. He'll be in touch." My next call was to our travel agent. "Maria, it's Catherine Davenport. I need to cancel our anniversary trip to the Amalfi Coast next month." "Oh, Catherine, no. Is something wrong?" You were both so excited. An anniversary trip? 23 years? He had probably been planning to take Chloe toasting their future in the villa I had spent weeks selecting. "A change of plans," I said, my voice cold and even. "Cancel it all? The villa, the flights, the private tours, everything? But Catherine, the cancellation penalties will be enormous." "I'm aware. Send me the final bill." A text message lit up my screen from an unknown number. "Mrs. Davenport, this is Marco from Hotel Security. You left a small gift box on the front steps. Shall I have someone bring it to your car?" I looked down at my empty hands. In my daze, I had dropped the compass, the symbol of our beginning, abandoned on the cold stone where our life together had ended. Keep it, I texted back. Or throw it away. It no longer has any meaning. But it did have meaning. That was the problem. 23 years of meaning, of prioritizing his dreams, his comfort, his reputation. I had built my life around the compass of his ambition, and tonight he had smashed it on the ground. My phone lit up with an incoming call. Arthur. A photo of him from last summer, laughing at one of my jokes, his eyes crinkling in a way that used to make my heart ache with love. Before Chloe, before the lies. I declined the call. It rang again instantly, and again. On the fourth call, I started the engine, the quiet hum of the German engineering, a familiar comfort. Let him wonder, let him sweat, let him try to explain to his investors and his mistress why his perfect supportive wife had vanished into the night. The drive home took me along the coastal road, the dark churning ocean on my left, the glittering lights of the city on my right. We had built this life, this empire from nothing. And I was beginning to understand that what I had helped build, I also had the power to dismantle. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the passenger seat. The calls from Arthur were now interspersed with frantic texts. "Where are you? What is going on? Call me now!" By the time I turned into the long gravel driveway of our home, the screen showed 37 missed calls. I parked the car in the 4-car garage, surrounded by the trappings of a life that now felt like a costume. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of taking it all apart. But tonight, I would sleep in our bed, one last time as Mrs. Arthur Davenport. The woman who had walked into that party was a naive fool. The woman sitting in this car, watching her phone light up with the frantic calls of a man who had just destroyed himself, was someone else entirely. She was just getting started. I woke at dawn, a habit ingrained from years of rising early, to read the market reports before Arthur stirred. The empty expanse of the king-size bed beside me felt less like a loss and more like a vast unclaimed territory. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the first thoughts in my head were not about his schedule, his needs, his mood. They were about my own. In the cavernous silence of our kitchen, the whir of the coffee grinder was startlingly loud. I sat at the Marble Island, a place where Edith planned countless dinner parties and reviewed endless contracts, and felt a profound sense of detachment. It was a beautiful stage, but the play was over. My home office, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and view of the rose garden I tended myself, had always been my sanctuary. Now it was my war room. I bypassed the decorative volumes and went straight to the steel filing cabinets. Inside, organized with the meticulous precision I had once applied to Arthur's business, was the entire history of our financial life together. The first file I pulled was labeled Davenport Consolidated, Incorporation, 1999. There it was, on the brittle, 23-year-old paper, Catherine Sterling Davenport, co-founder and initial investor. My signature clear and confident next to his. A fact conveniently omitted from every single press release and corporate biography ever written. I photographed the page with my phone, the click of the shutter, a satisfyingly concrete sound. The next file was from 2004, a multi-million-dollar loan for a critical expansion. My signature was on the guarantee my personal assets, the inheritance from my father, pledged as collateral. He had taken the risk, but I had underwritten it. Another photo, another piece of the true story he had tried to erase. For 2 hours, I worked methodically, unearthing the financial bedrock I had provided for his empire. The sale of my stock portfolio in 2008 to cover payroll during the recession. The documentation of client referrals from my family's net worth that had resulted in tens of millions in revenue. The deed to our first home, purchased with my money, which we had later mortgaged to fund his first major acquisition. When I was finished, I had a digital file containing irrefutable proof of over $30 million in direct and indirect investment. At precisely 8:55 a.m., my phone rang. It was Liam. "Catherine, the market's open in 5 minutes. I have to ask you one last time if you're sure." His voice was strained. "Word is already trickling out. Pre-market trading for DC is down 4%. This will cause a panic." "I'm sure, Liam," I said, looking out at my roses, their petals heavy with morning dew. "I have never been more certain of anything." "All right," he sighed. "The sell order is placed, and the accounts are frozen." It's done. I hung up and opened my laptop. The email I'd drafted in the pre-dawn hours was concise and clinical. It was addressed to the entire board of directors of Davenport Consolidated. Subject: notice of divestment and termination of financial agreements. There was no emotion, no explanation. Just a formal notification of the liquidation of my 15% stake and the immediate freezing of all joint financial instruments that had for years propped up the company's liquidity. My finger hovered over the send button for only a second. The response was immediate. My phone, which had been quiet for a few hours, erupted. Arthur's name flashed a frantic beacon. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. The sheer persistence of it was a measure of his dawning terror. Then came the texts, each one more unhinged than the last. "Catherine, what in God's name have you done?" The bank just called. "Call me. Delete. This is insane. You can burn down everything we built over one misunderstanding. Delete? The board is calling an emergency meeting. You have created a corporate catastrophe. You have to reverse this. Delete." A strange sense of calm settled over me. Each unanswered call, each deleted text, was a small act of reclamation. I was no longer the supportive wife, the silent partner, the keeper of his peace. I was a sovereign entity, and he was learning the hard way what that meant. My landline, a number only my sister Clara knew, began to ring. I let the machine pick it up. "Catherine, it's Clara. Arthur just called me sobbing. He said you've had some sort of breakdown, that you're destroying the company out of spite. Please, call me. Whatever he did, this is not the way." I walked to the window, watching a small hummingbird dart among the fuchsia. Spite felt too small a word for what I was feeling. This wasn't about lashing out. It was about balancing the scales. For years the scales had been tipped so far in his favor that I hadn't even noticed I was on the ground. A text from an unknown number arrived. "Catherine, this is Chloe. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Arthur is beside himself. I'm sure we can sit down and work this out in a way that's amenable to everyone." The condescension was breathtaking. The woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation now wanted to work it out. She saw me not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. I typed a reply. "There is no we to work anything out. And for future reference, my name is Miss Sterling." Her immediate reply: "Let's not be childish. A lot of people's livelihoods are at stake." I took a screenshot and added it to my evidence file. She was right. A lot of livelihoods were at stake, starting with hers. By the time I showered and dressed for the day, choosing a charcoal grey suit that felt like armor, my phone showed 56 missed calls from Arthur. The frantic buzzing had become a kind of background music to my liberation. The woman who had been discarded at the party was gone. In her place was a co-founder, a primary investor, and a creditor. And I was on my way to a board meeting to which I had essentially just summoned myself. The boardroom at Davenport Consolidated was designed to intimidate. A vast slab of polished mahogany reflected the panoramic view of the Port Meridian skyline. It was a room built for power, and for years I had only ever been a guest in it. Today, I walked in and took a seat, not at the side, but at the table directly opposite Arthur's empty chair. I arrived 20 minutes early and laid out my files in a neat, undeniable row. The other board members, all men I had hosted in my home, trickled in one by one. They avoided my eyes, their discomfort palpable. Marcus Thorne, the CFO, gave me a tight, grim nod. Our corporate counsel looked physically ill. Arthur burst through the doors precisely at 10:00 a.m. He looked like a man who had been dragged through a storm. His silver hair, usually so perfectly coiffed, was a mess. His tie was askew. The confident titan of industry was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man. Chloe trailed in his wake, her crimson power dress from the night before, replaced by a somber navy suit. She hovered by the wall, trying to project an air of authority, but looking like a frightened accessory. "Catherine." Arthur's voice was a ragged whisper. "What have you done?" I looked at him calmly, my hands folded on the table. "Good morning, Arthur. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Don't you dare play these games?" He exploded, slamming his hand on the table. Several members flinched. "Our stock is in freefall. Our credit lines are frozen. You've single-handedly jeopardized this entire company." He began to pace, running his hands through his hair. 23 years of work, my life's work, destroyed overnight because you're having some kind of menopausal fit of hysterics. The accusation hung in the silent, tense air. I could feel the board members watching me, waiting for the tears, the outburst that would confirm Arthur's narrative of the unstable emotional wife. I did not give it to them. Instead, I pushed the first file across the polished table. This, I said, my voice steady and clear, is the original 1999 incorporation document. You'll note my name, Catherine Sterling Davenport, is listed as co-founder. Arthur stopped pacing. That was a formality. I pushed the second file forward. This is the loan guarantee I personally signed in 2004, collateralizing the funds for our first major acquisition with my own assets. The company's risk was my risk. I let that sink in before producing a final, thicker document. And this is a summary of every direct cash infusion, stock liquidation, and collateralized asset I have contributed to Davenport Consolidated over 23 years. The total adjusted for inflation is just over $32 million. Not including, of course, the unquantifiable value of my strategic advice and networking. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city traffic below. Arthur's face had gone from a florid red to a sickly pale white. He stared at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. "What is it you want?" Catherine, the lawyer, finally asked, his voice cautious. "I don't want anything," I replied, standing up. "I have already acted. My 15% stake is sold. My capital is withdrawn. As of this morning, Davenport Consolidated is facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis. I am no longer an owner. I am simply a primary and now very concerned creditor." For the first time, I looked directly at Chloe. Her professional mask had crumbled, revealing the raw fear of a woman who had just realized her golden ticket was C-suite access to a sinking ship. Of course, I continued, my gaze still locked on her. A company can recover from a crisis like this. It requires decisive action. A complete change in leadership, for instance. Someone who can restore the trust of the banks and the market. Someone without the baggage of a pending and likely very public personal scandal. Arthur followed my gaze to his mistress, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for him. The blood drained from his face as he understood. This wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. "You're doing this to ruin me," he whispered, slumping into his chair. "Because of Chloe." "This isn't about revenge, Arthur," I said, gathering my files. "It's about a balance sheet. For 23 years, my contributions were listed as assets on your life's ledger. I'm simply moving them back to my own." I walked to the door, my posture erect, my steps even. "I suggest you start discussing a succession plan. You're going to need a new CEO, one with a cleaner reputation." I paused with my hand on the door handle and turned back to him. For a fleeting second, I saw the young man had fallen, for the one with fire in his eyes. But the fire was gone, replaced by the ashes of his own arrogance. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the divorce," I said softly. "Once you've sorted out the fate of the company, we can begin dividing what's left of our personal assets." I walked out of the boardroom and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the eruption of frantic, panicked voices. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and as the doors closed, sealing me in a silent, mirrored cube, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. I had spent half my life being the invisible woman. It had taught me exactly where to press to make the entire structure fall. The year that followed was not a blur, but a series of distinct, sharply focused moments of becoming. The legal battle was brutal, but I had the truth and the paperwork on my side. Arthur, stripped of his corporate throne and facing financial ruin, fought bitterly. But my lawyer, a brilliant, tireless woman named Isabel Reyes, dismantled his claims one by one. We settled out of court. He kept a fraction of his former fortune. I kept my dignity, my independence, and the capital I had rightfully earned. The sprawling stone house felt too large, too full of ghosts. I sold it and bought a light-filled penthouse apartment downtown, with a terrace that overlooked the entire city. My first act was to set up an easel by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a throwback to a passion for painting I'd abandoned in college, because Arthur had deemed it an impractical hobby. My first painting was of the ocean, not the calm, placid view from our old home, but a turbulent, stormy sea full of power and raw beauty. It was terrible, but it was mine. I started a small investment firm, Sterling Guild, with a mission to fund women-led startups. I found I had a gift for it. The same instincts that had allowed me to see the potential in a hungry young associate now allowed me to see the promise in a biotech engineer developing a new water purification system, or a software designer creating an app to help domestic abuse survivors. I wasn't just writing checks. I was mentoring, advising, using my experience to help other women build foundations that could not be shaken. My sister Clara and I began to rebuild our relationship. One afternoon, over coffee on my new terrace, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "I'm sorry, Catherine," she said quietly. "For all those years, I saw you as an extension of him. I never really saw you. It was the beginning of a new, more honest sisterhood." One crisp autumn evening, a year and a half after the party, I attended a charity gala for one of the startups I was funding. I was there not as a plus one, but as a primary sponsor and a member of the board. As I was speaking with the young CEO, I saw him across the room. Arthur looked older. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary air. He was with a woman, someone age-appropriate and elegantly understated. Our eyes met. He hesitated for a moment, then walked toward me. "Catherine," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You look well." "I'm well?" "Arthur," I replied, and the truth of it resonated in my own ears. "Very well. I saw the article about sterling gilt in Forbes," he said. "What you're doing is remarkable." Who just wanted to say, I was wrong. About everything. I built an empire, and in the process, I demolished my life. I'm sorry. The apology, so long in coming, landed not with a crash, but with a quiet sense of finality. It was no longer something I needed, but I was grateful for it nonetheless. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "I hope you find a way to build something new, something that lasts." I smiled a genuine, untroubled smile and turned back to my conversation. I felt his eyes on my back as I walked away, but there was no pull, no lingering connection. He was just a man I used to, no other chapter in a book I had finished reading. Later that night, I stood on my terrace, the city lights spread out before me like a carpet of fallen stars. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the young CEO. "We just passed our fundraising goal. Thank you, Catherine. You made this possible." I didn't reply immediately. I simply looked out at the vast, glittering expanse. For 23 years, I had worked to build a monument to a man. Now, I was quietly, contentedly building a legacy of my own. And as the cool night air washed over me, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost a husband, a home, a life I thought I knew. But in its place, I had found something infinitely more valuable, myself.